He bought a $200 haunted cabin. Then his German shepherd found what locals feared for decades. The road to Marrow Creek twisted like a scar through the mountains. Snow clung to the pines, heavy and silent, as Eli Grant's truck groaned up the final mile of dirt. He hadn't seen another car for hours. Just trees, mist, and the echo of wind brushing against the windshield. He pulled over when the trail ended. A rusted mailbox, half buried in frost, marked the place. The mailbox still carried the name of someone long gone. Avery. Beneath it, the path led to a cabin slumped under the weight of time, its roof bowed, windows fogged, and chimney cracked down the middle like an old spine. Eli killed the engine. For a moment there was only silence. Then came the low whine from the passenger seat. "Yeah, I see it too," he murmured. Rocco, his German shepherd, leaned forward, paws on the dash. The dog's amber eyes caught the reflection of the cabin. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, he just stared, alert and still. $200, Eli said quietly. "Guess we'll find out if it was a bargain or a warning." He opened the door, and the cold mountain air punched through the quiet. The smell of pine and iron filled his lungs. Rocco jumped down beside him, boots crunching the frozen dirt. Together they walked toward the porch. Every step creaked like a protest. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and rot. The floorboards had warped. Dust covered everything except a small wooden table near the window. A coffee mug still sat there, cracked but not broken. It looked as if someone had just stepped out and never returned. Eli dropped his duffel bag near the wall and crouched by the stone fireplace. The hearth was blackened, the stones cold to the touch. Rocco sniffed around the corners, nose close to the ground, tail straight out. Then he froze. That stillness. Eli knew it. He'd seen it in rescue tunnels, in mines just before a collapse. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Rocco's ears flattened, his eyes locked on the base of the fireplace. A low growl rose from his chest, deep and steady, like the sound of a fault line ready to break. Eli felt a ripple in his gut. He knelt and pressed his palm to one of the lower stones. It was colder than the others. Too smooth. He tapped it lightly. A hollow sound. He grabbed a flashlight from his pack and angled the beam along the seams. There, barely visible, was a faint outline, a cut between two stones that shouldn't have been there. Rocco took a slow step backward, then sat. He didn't growl again, just watched. Eli hesitated, the beam trembling slightly in his hand. He wasn't a superstitious man. He'd seen worse than any ghost story. But something about the air in this room, it felt wrong, heavy, expectant. He grabbed the small pry bar from his toolkit and wedged it into the crack. The mortar gave easier than it should have. He applied. Pressure. The stone shifted, then fell away with a muted thud. Behind it, darkness. A hollow chamber beneath the hearth, maybe 3 feet deep. He crouched closer, shining the light down. The beam hit metal, an old ammo box green with rust. Beside it lay a small bundle wrapped in decayed fabric. For a heartbeat, he thought it might be bone. But no, it was too smooth, too deliberate. Rocco growled again. Not loud, but warning enough. Eli reached in slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the box. It was cold, heavier than it looked. He lifted it onto the floor. The latch groaned when he forced it open. Inside were 3 notebooks, bound with what looked like a bootlace and a folded map stiff with age. The first page of the top notebook bore a name written in careful ink. Michael Avery. The name matched the one on the mailbox. Eli frowned. He remembered seeing it before. An article online, something about a missing journalist who vanished in this area 2 decades ago. Locals said he'd gone crazy chasing conspiracy theories about the mines. The town called it the haunting of Marrow Creek. He flipped a few pages. Notes filled every inch of paper. Measurements, coordinates, warnings. One line stood out, circled twice. The water is poisoned. They paid to keep it quiet. The fire in the hearth popped. Rocco tensed, head snapping toward the sound. "Easy," Eli said softly, but his voice cracked in the cold. He turned the flashlight toward the fireplace again. Something glistened between the stones, just for a second, like moisture catching light. Then gone. Rocco moved forward, muscles taut. He sniffed at the hearth, nose pressed to the base where Eli had removed the stone. Then he stopped. His entire body stiffened, tail low, a rumble vibrating through his chest. "Rocco," Eli said, crouching. The dog didn't look away. He was staring into the hole. Eli followed his gaze and saw something he hadn't noticed before. A faint shimmer of color, like metal buried deeper in the dirt. He dug a gloved hand into the opening, scraping aside the soil. His fingers brushed glass. He pulled it free. A small vial. Clear. Sealed. The label had faded, but a red triangle symbol was still visible, along with a single word. Toxic. A rush of cold shot through him. He glanced back at the open notebook, the line about poisoned water. Then at the vial. Then at Rocco, who was now backing away slowly, hackles up. Outside, the wind rose to a scream, battering the cabin walls. The windows rattled, the chimney moaned. Eli looked at the vial again, the cloudy residue swirling inside like smoke under glass. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He thought he heard something else beneath the wind, a sound faint but human, maybe a whisper carried through the stones. He froze, listening. Nothing. Just the fire popping, the dog breathing, the storm raging outside. Then from under the floor came a dull, rhythmic thud. Once. Then again. Rocco barked, short and sharp, then lunged toward the sound. His claws scraped the wood. Eli dropped the vial, heart hammering. He forced himself to move, pulling Rocco back by the collar. "Easy, boy, stay." The thudding stopped. The cabin fell silent again, except for the wind. Eli looked down at the open hole, the notebook, and the vial glinting near the firelight. The unease in his chest settled into certainty. Whatever haunted this place wasn't made of ghosts. It was something buried and breathing. He reached for Rocco's head, fingers brushing the rough fur between his ears. The dog's breathing slowed, but his eyes never left the hearth. "Guess this cabin didn't come cheap after all," Eli murmured. Outside, the storm howled through the valley, carrying with it the sound of something that wasn't quite wind. And inside the cabin, man and dog sat motionless, listening, both of them knowing this was only the beginning. The morning after the storm, the world outside the cabin looked scrubbed raw. Snow layered the trees in heavy silence. Inside, smoke still curled from the hearth, thin and grey, like breath from something that refused to die. Eli Grant sat at the table, a mug of cold coffee in his hands, eyes fixed on the spot beneath the fireplace. Rocco hadn't moved all morning. The shepherd sat squarely between the fire and the front door, his gaze anchored to the base of the hearth. Every so often his ears twitched, and a low sound rumbled in his chest. Not fear, but warning. Eli rubbed the edge of the coffee mug between his palms. "You're not letting this go, huh?" Rocco didn't blink. His fur bristled, tail still. Eli sighed, stood, and grabbed the crowbar from the corner where he'd left it the night before. The metal was cold, the kind of cold that settled in your bones. He crouched at the fireplace again, studying the seam where the stone had given way. The air leaking through it was faintly warm, as if the cavity below still held its own breath. "All right, buddy, Let's see what's got you spooked. Rocco's head tilted, eyes following his every move. Eli jammed the tip of the crowbar under another loose stone and pried. The mortar cracked. A dull echo answered back, a hollow space. He set the tool aside and dug his fingers into the gap. The stone lifted free with a grunt. Beneath it, black soil and the faint outline of an opening just big enough to fit a man's shoulders. The smell hit him first. Old iron and damp earth. He aimed his flashlight into the hole. Something metallic glinted beneath layers of dust. A green military ammo box, rusted shut, and beside it a bundle of leather notebooks bound with a fraying bootlace. Rocco took a step forward, nose twitching. The dog didn't growl this time. He lowered his head and sniffed once, then sat back down. Quiet, patient, like a soldier waiting for orders. Eli reached down carefully and pulled out the ammo box. It was heavier than he expected, the lid sealed tight by corrosion. He placed it on the floor and wiped the dust from the top. The faded stenciling read, U.S. Property, Field Grade. He found a screwdriver and worked the hinge until it snapped loose. The lid creaked open. Inside were smaller metal vials, each labeled with hand-scribbled coordinates, and a handful of soil samples sealed in old zip bags. He picked one up. The dirt inside was black, almost oily. Rocco's nose twitched again. He let out a soft whine and turned his head toward the open door, as if something outside had shifted. Eli froze, listening. Only wind. But his gut tightened anyway. He returned to the hole and lifted out the bundle of notebooks. The leather was cracked, stiff with age. When he tugged at the lace, it disintegrated in his hands. He opened the first notebook. The handwriting was tight and deliberate, the kind of script used by men who think fast and write faster. Dates ran along the margins, 1998, 1999, and then paragraphs of numbers, water readings, sample logs, and notes that grew more frantic with every page. Eli flipped until one line stopped him cold. They said the water was safe. Then the deer started dying. He looked down at the next page. Underlined twice. Norcon Energy. Dump site confirmed. The name Norcon tugged at something familiar. He'd worked in mining long enough to know the kind of company that cut corners to save profit. They'd owned half the valley 20 years ago. Then, one winter, they vanished. Licenses revoked, lawsuits buried, no trace left except whispers. He turned another page. More coordinates, more warnings. And then, at the bottom of a sheet, written in bold, uneven strokes, "If something happens to me, tell the truth." The signature beneath it read, Michael Avery. Eli sat back, staring at the name. He remembered now. The journalist who disappeared while investigating Norcon's land purchases. The man whose truck was found abandoned on this very ridge. Keys still in the ignition. Local rumor said the cabin was cursed after that. Haunted. Rocco stood up again, pacing near the fireplace. His nails clicked on the floorboards, each step deliberate. He stopped suddenly, staring into the dark cavity where the box had been. His body stiffened, tail low, ears forward. Then slowly his lips peeled back, not a snarl, but a sound of conviction, deep and certain. Eli lowered the notebook. "What is it?" The growl deepened. Rocco's gaze didn't move. Eli felt the shift in the air again, that faint static he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The cabin's walls seemed to draw in, the firelight flickering against the wood like it was breathing. He aimed the flashlight back into the hole. Something new caught the beam, a faint reflection at the very back, maybe metal, maybe glass. He reached in and pulled out another vial, half buried in dust. The label had peeled away, but the smell when he opened it made his throat tighten. It wasn't rot. It was chemical. Sharp. Sour. Industrial. He sealed it quickly and dropped it back in the box. Jesus. he muttered. Outside, the wind picked up again, slamming against the windows. But under the storm, Eli swore he heard something else. A creak of wood, faint footsteps across snow. Rocco barked once, a single command of sound that filled the room like a warning flare. Eli grabbed his flashlight, moved to the window, and peered out. Nothing. Just the empty slope and the black line of forest. He turned back toward the hearth. The notebooks lay open, pages rippling in the draft. The last entry was scrawled larger than the rest, almost as if Avery had been writing in the dark. "They're coming. Don't let them bury it again." Rocco's head snapped towards the door. He didn't bark this time. He just stood, muscles tensed, waiting. Eli crouched and closed the notebooks carefully. His pulse steadied, slow and deliberate. The fear was gone, replaced by something sharper. Purpose. "All right, boy," he said quietly. "We're not done." Rocco looked up at him, eyes reflecting the firelight. Steady, intelligent, loyal. He took a step closer and pressed his head against Eli's knee. For the first time in years, Eli felt something like clarity. Whatever Michael Avery had found, whatever Norcon had buried, it was still here. And his dog, this scarred, stubborn shepherd, wasn't going to stop until they unearthed it. Outside, the snow began to fall again, whispering against the roof. Inside, the fire crackled low, its light flickering over two figures, one man, one dog, standing guard over the first pieces of a truth that refused to stay buried. By late morning, the storm had quieted, leaving the mountains glazed with ice and sunlight. Steam rose from the chimney in thin ribbons. Eli was on the porch, hammering loose planks back into place when he heard the crunch of tires on frozen gravel. Rocco lifted his head before Eli did. One short bark, sharp and deliberate. Not fear. Alert. A tan SUV crawled up the trail, snow spitting from its tires. It rolled to a stop in front of the cabin, engine humming low. On the door, faded paint spelled Marrow County Sheriff. The driver stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, face red from the cold. He wore a sheepskin jacket, a badge pinned just above the heart. "Morning," the man called out, voice friendly enough to sound practiced. "You must be Mr. Grant." Eli straightened, hammer still in hand. "That's me." The sheriff's grin widened, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Sheriff Hank Dillard. Just making my rounds. We don't get many new faces out here, especially not in winter." He stepped closer, boots sinking into the snow. Rocco moved beside Eli, shoulder brushing his leg, tail low but steady. "Nice dog," Dillard said, stopping just shy of the porch steps. "He's not for show," Eli replied. Dillard chuckled. "Looks like it. Shepherd, right? Military stock?" "Rescue," Eli said. "Like me." The sheriff's grin flickered. "So what brings a man like you out to the end of the world? Cabin like this doesn't exactly scream comfort." "Needed quiet," Eli said. "And the price was right." Dillard tilted his head. "Yeah, $200 for a cabin this size. That's what the record says." He kicked at the snow. "Hell of a deal. Guess the county clerk was feeling generous." Eli didn't answer. The sheriff's gaze drifted past him to the faint outline of tools and scrap wood near the porch, then toward the dark mouth of the fireplace visible through the open door. "You been doing some work in there?" he asked casually. "Just cleaning up." "Uh-huh." Dillard smiled again. Too slow, too even. "Funny thing, this place has been empty for years. Nobody wanted it after the Avery incident." Eli leaned against the porch post. "You mean the reporter?" Dillard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know that story." "Hard not to. His name's still on the mailbox." "Yeah," the sheriff said softly. "He came up here poking around about Norcon, asking questions, stirring folks up. One day he just vanished. Search teams went out for a week. Nothing. Guess the mountain took him. Eli watched Dillard carefully. The sheriff wasn't reminiscing. He was measuring. Each word was a feeler, a test. Rocco growled under his breath. Dillard glanced down, forcing a laugh. Guess he doesn't like old stories. He just doesn't like lies, Eli said. Dillard's grin froze for half a heartbeat before returning, thin as wire. You know, people around here get spooked easy. Ghost tales, government rumors. I tell them the mountain's got more stories than it needs. He stepped back toward his SUV. Anyway, welcome to Marrow Creek. You ever need anything, or see anything, you give me a call. He pulled a card from his coat and set it on the porch rail. And maybe don't do too much digging, huh? Ground's not as stable as it looks. Eli nodded once. I'll keep that in mind. Dillard tipped his hat and climbed into the SUV. As the engine started, Rocco barked once, louder this time, teeth bared towards the woods. Dillard flinched at the sound but didn't turn around. He drove off, tires grinding through the slush until the truck disappeared around the bend. Eli stood there for a moment, card still untouched on the railing. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the trees. Rocco moved first. He walked down the porch steps, nose to the ground, tracing a path past the tire tracks. He stopped near the edge of the tree line and looked back at Eli. What is it? Eli asked. Rocco barked once, short and urgent. Eli grabbed his coat and followed. Behind the cabin, the snow was churned up, marked by prints that didn't belong there. Heavy boots, fresh, leading away from the woods toward the back of the property. The tread didn't match Dillard's. Eli crouched, running a gloved hand over the indentations. The snow inside hadn't frozen yet. Someone had been here this morning. He followed the trail for a few feet until it crossed into tire ruts, broad, knobby tracks that led up the ridge and back toward the main road. The tires were government issue. Eli straightened. The cabin loomed behind him, smoke curling from the chimney like a signal. Rocco was pacing now, scanning the tree line, every muscle alive. He stopped suddenly and lifted his head, sniffing. His tail dropped. The sound that came from his throat wasn't a bark or a whine. It was that low growl again, the one that came before everything went wrong. Eli's hand went instinctively to the pistol holstered beneath his jacket. You smell it, don't you? Rocco didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the forest beyond the creek. The silence out there was wrong. Too still, like the woods were holding their breath. Then a crow burst from a pine branch, scattering snow, and the echo cracked through the valley. Eli exhaled, forcing calm. All right, we're not alone. He turned back toward the cabin. On the porch, the sheriff's card had blown halfway to the door, pinned against the wood by a gust of wind. He picked it up. It wasn't just a card. There was writing on the back. 4 words scrawled in quick pencil. You shouldn't have dug. Rocco barked again, once, sharp and final. Eli looked toward the tree line, the message still in his hand. Snowflakes swirled around them, slow and soundless. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an engine started. The distant hum echoed off the trees, fading into the white. Eli slipped the card into his pocket. His heartbeat slowed, steady as Rocco's breathing beside him. Whatever they'd found in that fireplace had already started something, and someone out there was making sure it didn't go any further. He rested a hand on Rocco's head. We'll play it smart, boy, he said quietly. But we're not backing down. Rocco leaned against his leg, eyes still locked on the woods, ears twitching with every sound the wind carried. The sheriff's smile had left the mountain, but its shadow lingered, and both man and dog could feel it watching from the trees. Night fell early in Marrow Creek, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything but the crackle of the fire. Eli sat at the small table near the hearth, Avery's notebook spread open like relics from another life. Each page was a map of obsession, coordinates, sketches of the creek, lists of names, and sentences scrawled in uneven ink as if written in panic. He traced a finger along one of the maps. Tiny red X's marked different spots along the creek's edge. Next to one, Avery had written in hurried strokes, "They found me." Eli leaned back, the chair creaking beneath his weight. He could almost feel Avery here, the fear, the urgency. Whoever this man was, he hadn't just been documenting corporate pollution, he'd been hunted. Rocco lay nearby, head on his paws, but his ears flicked every few seconds. His body was at rest, his instincts were not. Eli flipped through the next notebook. Inside were photos, grainy black and white prints, the edges water-stained. He held one under the lamplight. It showed a line of industrial barrels near the creek, the Norcon Energy logo stenciled across them. The barrels were open, liquid leaking into the soil. Another photo showed a man in uniform standing beside them. The man's face was partially shadowed, but the badge on his chest gleamed clear as daylight. Marrow County Sheriff's Department. Eli stared at the image for a long time. His stomach tightened. The outline of the jaw, the posture, it looked too familiar. He flipped the picture over. In shaky handwriting, someone had written, "Dillard, 2001. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. He felt Rocco stir before he heard it, the dog's claws tapping the floorboards as he rose. Rocco's head turned sharply toward the far wall, the one opposite the hearth. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring. Then he froze, every muscle taut. Eli stood, following his gaze. "What is it, boy?" Rocco didn't move. He took a single step forward, then stopped again. His hackles lifted, a low vibration building in his throat. Eli moved closer to the wall, flashlight in hand. The beam caught dust floating in the air like ash. He pressed his ear against the wood. For a moment, nothing. Then, 3 faint knocks, not random, spaced, intentional, knock, pause, knock, knock. Eli jerked back, breath shallow. The sound had come from inside the wall, or beyond it. He crouched, tracing the seams between the boards. One section felt newer, smoother than the rest, like someone had replaced it years after the cabin was built. Rocco let out a sharp bark, then went silent again, his eyes locked on the same spot. Eli set down the flashlight, grabbed a crowbar, and wedged it into the seam. The board came loose with a pop of nails. Behind it was darkness. He shone the light inside. At first, all he saw was dust. Then something metallic caught the beam, a small latch on the floor inside the wall cavity. He reached in and pulled. The latch lifted a square of hidden flooring, revealing a narrow compartment beneath. Inside was a manila envelope, sealed with tape and wrapped in plastic. He set it on the table and peeled it open. More photos, dozens, and beneath them a cassette tape labeled Marrow Creek Final. He held it up. The handwriting matched Avery's. He turned the tape over in his hands. It had been recorded on both sides. The date written on the edge read, February 6th, 2001, 3 days before Avery disappeared. Eli searched the shelves until he found an old tape player half buried under a pile of tools. He popped in the cassette and hit play. Static filled the cabin. Then a voice. Shaky. Tired. Male. If this gets out, it means they didn't stop. The barrels are still there. Norcon paid Dillard to bury it. He's been covering their tracks for months. I think they're watching me from the tree line. I can hear... The recording cut off. Static. Then silence. Eli sat frozen, staring at the player. His hands felt numb. Rocco stood beside him now, body pressed against his leg, steadying him. The dog's breath came slow and rhythmic, but his eyes never left the open wall. Eli turned the tape over and pressed play again. For several seconds, only wind. Then footsteps, heavy crunching snow, a door slamming, the creak of wood. Then Avery's voice again, frantic. "If anyone hears this, they know. Dillard knows. The water." A burst of static swallowed the rest. The tape ended. Eli ejected it and placed it on the table beside the photos. His pulse hammered in his ears. Behind him, a soft creak. He turned sharply, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing moved, but he could feel it. Pressure in the air, like the whole cabin was listening. Rocco shifted again, facing the wall. His nose brushed the wood, sniffing. Then he whined, low and uneasy. "Easy," Eli whispered. "We're fine." He wasn't sure he believed it. He crouched again by the wall and reached into the hollow. His hand brushed something else, paper, folded and brittle. He pulled it out carefully. It was another page from Avery's journal, torn at the edges. The writing was faint, smeared with water, but one line stood out in thick ink. "He comes at night. The badge isn't protection anymore." Outside, the wind had died completely. No branches moving, no sound at all. Then the knocking returned. Softer this time. 3 taps from deep inside the wall. Rocco barked, full voice now, chest reverberating. Eli swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was only wood, still and harmless. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. Nothing. No movement, no vibration. After a long moment, he exhaled and stepped back. Rocco's barking faded to a low growl that trembled through the room. "Someone wants this story buried," Eli said quietly, "and someone else left it for us to find." He looked at the scattered evidence, the maps marked with X's, the photos, the tape, the torn page. Then he looked at Rocco, who was still staring at the wall as if it might move again. "All right, boy," Eli whispered. "Let's find out who's knocking." The fire popped behind them, sparks flaring against the chimney stones. Outside, the snow began again, soft, soundless, and endless. Inside that cabin, the air carried something heavier than ghosts, the memory of truth clawing its way back to the surface. And as the wind whispered against the windows, Rocco stood guard, his growl echoing the one thing the mountain had tried for decades to silence. The wind screamed across the ridge, rattling the shutters until they banged like gunfire. Snow whipped against the cabin windows, and each gust made the walls groan as if the mountain itself was angry. Eli tossed another log into the fire and watched the flames stretch tall, hungry, and gold. Rocco lay by the door, half asleep, but never truly resting, his ears twitching at every sound the storm carried. It had been hours since Eli found the secret compartment. The tape and photos now sat locked in a metal box near his bed, wrapped in his jacket. He didn't know what to do next. He only knew one thing. Someone had been watching long before the sheriff showed up. The wind shifted again, but this time there was another sound beneath it, a faint crunch of footsteps, not the quick, uneven scurry of an animal. This was slow, measured, human. Rocco's head shot up, his entire body changed, muscles stiff, tail low, eyes burning towards the window. A deep rumble built in his throat. Eli moved quietly to the light switch and flipped it off. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of embers. The storm howled louder, masking everything. He crouched, reaching for the pistol on the table, the same one he hadn't fired in years. Then came a scrape at the back door. Metal against wood, a lock being tested. Rocco growled once, a warning that seemed to fill the entire room. Eli whispered, "Stay." The door shuddered, hinges whining. A second later, the back window shattered. Cold air burst through, followed by a figure in a black parka and ski mask. The intruder landed hard, snow scattering across the floor. In his gloved hand, a knife glinted. Rocco moved first, a blur of fur and power. He slammed into the man's arm before the blade could rise. The knife clattered across the floor. Rocco's teeth sank into the fabric of the man's sleeve, dragging him backward with a ferocity born from instinct. The man yelled, "Burn it all!" Eli lunged forward, kicking the knife away and grabbing the edge of the man's mask. For a split second, their eyes met through the stormlight. Pale blue, terrified but determined. The man shoved him hard, breaking free. Rocco leapt again, knocking him into the wall, but the intruder twisted, kicked, and bolted toward the broken window. Snow poured in as the man vanished into the white. Eli reached the window and fired once into the dark, the shot swallowed by the wind. Nothing. Only the storm. Then he smelled it. Gasoline. Thick and sharp. He turned. The scent wasn't just on the intruder, it was in the air, soaking through the floorboards. He ran to the back door, yanked it open, and froze. Lines of fire were crawling along the snow outside, snaking towards the cabin like veins of molten light. Someone had poured fuel around the perimeter. "Rocco, out!" he shouted. The dog barked once and sprinted toward him, but the flames reached the wall before they could escape. The first blast of heat hit like a wave. The windows blew inward, glass scattering across the floor. Eli grabbed the box of evidence, slung his pack over his shoulder, and ran to the side window. The air inside was already thick with smoke, the ceiling hissing with trapped heat. Rocco coughed, hacking through the haze, eyes wide and wet. "Stay close, boy," Eli said, throwing his jacket over the dog's back. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the glass. The window cracked, then gave way under his weight. Outside, the storm had turned vicious. Snow and fire mixed in the air, sparks spinning like insects in a white blizzard. Eli jumped first, landing hard in the snow. Rocco followed, leaping through the smoke, landing beside him with a yelp. Behind them, the cabin roared alive. Flames tore through the roof, lighting up the valley like sunrise. The heat was so fierce Eli could feel it even through the snow. They stumbled through the drifts, half crawling, half running until they reached the tree line. From there, Eli turned back. The cabin, Avery's last refuge, his own shelter, was burning to ash. The chimney collapsed in a cloud of sparks. He knelt beside Rocco, running his hands down the dog's flank. The fur along his right side was singed, a patch of skin raw and blistering. Rocco winced but didn't pull away. He pressed his head against Eli's chest rising fast but steady. "You're all right," Eli whispered. "You did good." Rocco's breath came out in clouds, his eyes locked on the fire. Eli looked back towards the trail. The intruder's footprints were already fading under the falling snow, but he caught something glinting near the tire ruts at the end of the drive. A small metal tag, half buried in ice. He dug it out with a gloved hand. It was a badge clip, the kind issued by county employees. He turned it over and saw the initials scratched into the back, H.D. Dillard. The snow fell heavier now, muffling everything. The fire crackled in the distance, collapsing what was left of the cabin. Eli felt a hollow in his chest, not just for what he'd lost, but for what had been proven true. Rocco stood again, limping but alert, eyes on the ridge above the creek. Somewhere up there, someone was watching. Eli tucked the badge clip into his coat. The cold bit at his hands, but he didn't care. The fear that had haunted him since he bought this cabin was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. He looked down at Rocco. "We're not running," he said. "Not this time." The dog wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. Together they turned away from the fire, vanishing into the falling snow as the last of the cabin's roof gave in. Behind them, the flames painted the sky, blood orange, a beacon on the mountain, a warning to anyone who still thought this secret would stay buried. Snow fell hard through the night, burying the valley in silence. The firelight from the burning cabin had faded hours ago, leaving only the hiss of the creek and the sharp wind that cut through the mountains. Eli and Rocco had taken shelter inside a narrow cave carved into the rock near the frozen stream. The air inside smelled of wet stone and pine. Rocco lay near the entrance, curled tight, his fur singed along one flank. He didn't sleep. Every few minutes his ears flicked toward the mouth of the cave, tracking the wind, listening for footsteps that never came. Eli sat on the ground, his back against the wall, a laptop balanced on his knees. The screen glowed faintly in the dark, casting light over his face. He typed fast, fingers trembling from cold and exhaustion. He had backed up every photo, every recording, every word from Avery's journals. The files were encrypted, locked behind layers of code only two people could access: him and Dean Holloway. Dean had been a reporter once, the kind who still believed in truth before the world broke him down. When Eli finished the upload, he stared at the progress bar, waiting for the message to send through the satellite uplink. The final line blinked on the screen. Transfer complete. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "It's out, buddy," he said quietly. "At least if they find us, they won't bury it again." Rocco lifted his head at his voice. His eyes caught the firelight, gold and steady. He got up slowly, limping over to Eli's side. Eli rested a hand on his neck, fingers brushing the coarse fur near the burn. "You did good back there," Eli murmured. "We both made it out." For a moment it was quiet again. Then Eli picked up Avery's last notebook, the one he had almost left behind before the fire. The edges were scorched, some pages blackened. He turned to the last entry Avery had written. The handwriting shook across the page, the ink smudged and frantic. "Sheriff hunting with Norcon men." Eli froze. He read it again, then again, feeling the words sink into him. Dillard hadn't just been covering up for Norcon. He had been working with them, hunting Avery. And now he was hunting him. Eli closed the notebook, the pages snapping shut like a verdict. He stared at the wall of the cave, remembering Dillard's voice, calm and oily, telling him not to dig too deep. Now he understood. The sheriff hadn't been warning him. He'd been threatening him. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and Rocco's head turned sharply towards the sound. He sniffed once, twice, then stood, tail stiff, muscles tense. "What is it?" Eli asked, reaching for his flashlight. Rocco padded to the cave's mouth, nose pressed to the air. Then he looked back at Eli and gave a short bark. Not panic. Command. Eli grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder. He followed the dog into the snow. The morning light was grey and heavy, barely touching the treetops. Rocco moved fast, despite his limp, head low, following an invisible trail. Eli kept up as best he could, boots crunching through the crust of ice. They crossed the creek, then climbed the slope beyond it. The trees thinned as they moved higher, the ground leveling out into a clearing where the snow had drifted unevenly. Rocco stopped, suddenly. He sniffed at the ground, then began to dig, paws scattering snow in frantic bursts. Eli knelt beside him, brushing away the top layer with his gloves. His fingers hit something solid, metal cold as bone. He wiped more snow aside. A circular edge appeared, corroded and half-buried. A rusted barrel. He scraped off the ice and found another one beside it, and another. 4 in total, arranged in a rough line. The stenciled letters were barely visible under the rust, but one symbol remained clear: the faded blue triangle of Norcon energy. Eli felt his chest tighten. The barrels were split. Seams rusted through, leaking a black residue that had frozen midstream in the cold. The smell of chemical rot cut through even the winter air. Rocco backed up, sneezing, ears twitching. He circled the barrels, nose low, growling softly. Then he stopped and looked at Eli, waiting. Eli took a slow breath. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what Avery found." He snapped photos with his phone, each click echoing in the cold. He filmed a short video, narrating what he saw, the company name, the coordinates, the contamination leaking into the soil. Then he turned the camera toward Rocco, who stood watch behind him, fur dusted with snow. "He found them," Eli said quietly into the recording. "He's the one who led me here." The wind carried his words away. Then, in the distance, an engine started. Low, rumbling, getting closer. Eli turned sharply. Through the trees, a shape moved, a dark SUV crawling along the ridge road. "Come on, boy," Eli whispered. "We've got to move." Rocco barked once and bounded ahead, leading the way down the slope towards the creek. Behind them, the sound of the engine grew louder, closer. Eli slipped once, caught himself, and kept moving. They reached the creek, just as the first echo of tires on gravel cut through the air. He turned back. Through the pines, he saw the SUV stop in the clearing. 2 men got out, their figures dark against the snow. One of them raised something to his face. Binoculars. They were looking straight at him. Eli ducked low, pulling Rocco behind a fallen tree. The men scanned the ridge for a moment, then began walking toward the barrels. One pointed. The other nodded. Eli felt Rocco tremble beside him, not in fear, but anticipation. The dog's ears twitched, eyes locked on the movement up ahead. Eli placed a hand on his neck. "Not yet," he whispered. He watched as the men reached the barrels. One of them kicked at the metal. The other poured something from a can. Gasoline. Eli's chest tightened. They weren't there to investigate. They were there to destroy the evidence. He raised his phone again, zoomed in, and filmed. Faces, actions, license plate, everything he could capture before they finished. Then he and Rocco slipped deeper into the trees, moving silent and fast toward the downstream path. The sound of a match striking flared behind them. Then came the dull roar of fire catching fuel, the air filled with the smell of burning oil and chemicals. Eli didn't look back. Rocco stayed close, ears pinned against the wind. They ran until the smoke vanished behind the hills, and the creek widened into open ground. Eli slowed, bending over, breath visible in clouds. Rocco stood beside him, panting, his breath ragged but steady. Eli looked at him and smiled faintly through the cold. "You always find the truth, don't you?" Rocco wagged his tail once, the motion small but certain. Eli looked up at the horizon. The sun was breaking through the clouds now, casting pale gold across the snow. Somewhere in that light lay the next piece of the story, the one Avery had died for. He touched Rocco's collar, then started walking. "Let's finish what he started." And as they disappeared into the white, the mountain behind them burned for the second time in 2 nights. This time, not as a warning, but as evidence that the truth was finally waking up. The snow had quieted overnight, leaving the forest blanketed in a deceptive calm. The fire from the ridge had burned itself out, but the smell of smoke still lingered, faint and sour in the frozen air. Eli followed Rocco through the pines, the dog's paws leaving sharp prints across the untouched snow. They had been walking for hours, tracing the markings from Avery's maps. Each red X led them deeper into the woods, away from the trails, away from everything human. The mountain felt different here, older, heavier, like it had been keeping a secret too long. Rocco stopped near a patch of exposed earth where the snow had thinned. He sniffed, circled once, then began to dig. His movements were purposeful, measured, strong, not frantic. Eli knew that rhythm. It was the same one that had saved lives back when they worked mine rescues. When Rocco found something, it was never by chance. Eli knelt beside him and started helping, using his small entrenching tool to scrape away the layers of ice and soil. After a few inches, the shovel hit something solid. He brushed the dirt aside with his gloved hands. At first, it looked like fabric, torn, sun-bleached, the dull green of old military canvas. He pulled gently. The cloth came up in stiff folds, disintegrating in the cold air. Beneath it, the curve of bone emerged, pale and brittle. Eli froze. His breath came out in clouds. He dug slower now, careful, revealing the full shape, a rib cage, an arm twisted under the chest, a skull half buried in roots. Rocco backed away, sitting a few feet off, his eyes fixed on the hole. He wasn't afraid. He was watching with the same quiet reverence he always had for the dead. Eli swallowed hard. "Michael Avery," he whispered. He reached down and brushed more dirt from the skull. Beside it lay a rusted metal badge clip and a cracked plastic card. The ink had bled, but the name was still there. Avery, Michael J. Next to it, half covered in mud, was a small handheld recorder. He picked it up carefully. The casing was cracked, but the tape inside was still intact. He pressed the play button out of instinct. The machine whirred weakly, static hissing through the tiny speaker. Then a voice broke through, the same voice he'd heard before on the other tape. "If anyone finds this..." A ragged breath, then the sound of wind. "Tell them it was never an accident." Then silence. The tape clicked to an end. Eli stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the mountain pressing down on his chest. He looked at Rocco. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if waiting for what came next. Eli exhaled. "You found him, buddy," he said quietly. "You found what they tried to bury." He took photos, close shots of the badge, the recorder, the skeletal remains. Then he panned across the barrels half buried nearby, their rusted tops gleaming through the frost. The picture told a story no one could deny. A journalist who uncovered the truth. A sheriff who silenced him. A corporation that poisoned an entire valley. Eli wiped his camera lens with a trembling hand and opened his satellite phone. The signal flickered weakly, then held. He typed fast, attaching every file, every coordinate, every image. The message was short but clear. "Found Avery. Confirmed Norcon barrels. Sending evidence now." He added the GPS pin and hit send. Dean Holloway's name flashed on the screen. It took less than a minute for the reply to come through. "Got it. Forwarding to FBI Environmental Crimes Unit. Get safe. They'll move fast." Eli stared at the words, then looked around the clearing. The snow was still falling, but faint trails of smoke rose between the trees, not from the fire, but from exhaust. He listened, and beneath the wind came the distant sound of an engine turning over. Rocco growled low in his chest. Eli shoved the recorder into his pack and slung it over his shoulder. "They're here." Rocco's body went rigid, ears forward, muscles tight as steel. Eli scanned the ridge line. Through the white haze, movement, two figures at the tree line, dark silhouettes against the snow. They were watching. He ducked low, pulling Rocco beside him. The men hadn't seen them yet, but they were getting closer, sweeping the ground with flashlights. One of the beams passed right over the half-dug grave. Eli felt his pulse slam in his ears. They weren't looking for Avery. They were looking for him. He crouched lower and whispered, "Easy, boy. Quiet now." Rocco didn't move, didn't make a sound. His eyes stayed locked on the intruders. When the light swept past again, Eli could see their faces clearly enough to know. One of them was the same man who had broken into the cabin. Gasoline. Fire. Burn it all. Eli's jaw tightened. He looked at Rocco. "We're not letting them erase him again." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He hit record, zooming in as the men knelt by the barrels. One of them lifted the lid of a metal canister, inspecting it. The other spoke, voice faint but audible over the wind. Orders are the same. Get rid of everything. Even the body? A pause, then, especially the body. Eli's stomach twisted. He ended the recording, slipped the phone back into his pack, and signaled to Rocco. The dog shifted beside him, muscles coiled, ready. Eli whispered, "Go." Rocco darted out first, silent as a shadow, cutting across the snow behind the men. One of them turned too late. The shepherd hit him from the side, knocking him flat. The other man shouted, spinning toward the noise. Eli rose from behind the tree, pistol raised. "Don't move." The man froze, hands half lifted. Rocco stood over the first intruder, teeth bared but not biting, chest heaving with a deep growl. "Who sent you?" Eli demanded. The man hesitated, then his lips curved in a thin smile. "You already know." He glanced toward the barrels, toward the grave. "You shouldn't have dug here." Eli stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his gun to the man's shoulder. "Avery deserved better than this." The man's smirk faded. He spat into the snow. "Avery got what he earned." Before Eli could react, headlights flared on the ridge. Another vehicle. More men. He looked down at Rocco. "Time to go." Rocco backed up, never taking his eyes off the intruder until Eli gave the signal. Then they turned, running down the slope as shouts broke behind them. Bullets cracked through the trees, tearing branches. Snow exploded around their feet. They didn't stop until the forest swallowed the noise. Eli dropped behind a fallen pine, breath sharp in his chest. Rocco crouched beside him, tongue lolling, sides heaving. Despite the burn, despite the chase, his eyes were clear and alive. Eli looked at him and nodded. "You saved us again, partner." He pulled out his phone, checked for the confirmation signal. The data transfer to Dean had gone through. Everything, photos, audio, coordinates, had already reached Denver. Rocco leaned against him, warm and steady against the cold. Eli looked out over the ridge, where smoke now drifted up from the clearing. He could imagine what they were doing. Burning what they couldn't hide. Burying what they couldn't explain. But this time, they were too late. The truth had already left the mountain. He whispered, "They can burn the mountain if they want, but not this." Rocco's ears flicked, eyes following the smoke as if he understood. And in that moment, Eli realized the battle wasn't about survival anymore. It was about justice. The mountain had held its secret for 20 years. Now, thanks to one man and his dog, it would finally speak. The thaw came late that year. For days the mountain dripped and sighed as snow melted into the rivers. The frozen ground turned to mud, and the wind carried the smell of pine and rust. From the ridge, Eli watched as a convoy of black SUVs crawled up the narrow trail, their tires spitting slush. On the sides of the vehicles, white letters gleamed. FBI. Rocco stood beside him, tail still, head high, eyes locked on the road. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched, as if he understood what this day meant. Eli had been up since dawn, guiding agents to the coordinates he'd sent. They moved methodically, setting up a perimeter around the clearing where Avery's remains had been found. Men in white hazmat suits began excavating the rusted barrels, their gloved hands steady, careful not to disturb the evidence. It should have felt like closure, but Eli's chest was tight. He scanned the tree line. For the first time in days, he didn't see movement, no shadows, no engines in the distance. Yet something in the air felt wrong. The quiet was too complete. Rocco stiffened suddenly, nose tilting into the wind. A low growl rippled through his chest. Eli turned toward the sound just as the echo of another engine drifted up the valley. 3 more trucks were climbing the old logging road. Not bureau vehicles. Eli's gut turned cold. He ran down the slope, waving to the nearest agent. We've got incoming. South Ridge, 3 trucks. The agents moved fast, pulling weapons, forming a line along the ridge. The sound grew louder, engines straining as the trucks forced their way through the melting snow. When they stopped, the first man out wasn't one of Norcon's contractors. It was Sheriff Dillard. His uniform was half unbuttoned, his badge dulled by ash. Behind him, 2 deputies climbed out, faces grim. One carried a canister. Eli's stomach dropped. Gasoline. "Don't do this, Dillard," he shouted across the clearing. "It's over." Dillard raised a hand. His face was pale, drawn, but his voice carried steady. "You think it's over because you brought the feds? You don't know these people, Grant. You never did." The deputies began walking toward the storage shed where the barrels had been temporarily stacked. One unscrewed the lid of the canister. The other struck a match. Rocco barked, a sharp, commanding sound that sliced through the chaos. Eli reached for his sidearm, but Dillard drew first, firing into the air. "Back off!" he roared, gun swinging toward the agents. "You'll never make it down the mountain with what you found." The agents shouted warnings, weapons raised. Rocco bolted before Eli could stop him. He tore across the clearing like a streak of fire, snow exploding under his paws. The first deputy dropped the match, startled, but Rocco was already there. He slammed into the man's chest, teeth flashing. The canister fell, spilling gas into the dirt. Eli sprinted after him. "Rocco, down!" The shepherd backed off just enough for Eli to kick the weapon away. The second deputy stumbled backward, slipping on the mud. His gun went off, wild, the bullet ricocheting into a tree. Then came the hiss, the unmistakable sound of gas catching spark. Eli turned. Dillard was standing at the shed's entrance, lighter in hand, flames trembling at the tip. "Don't!" Eli yelled. "You light that, you'll kill everyone here." Dillard looked at him, eyes hollow. "You think I don't know what's buried in there? I was the one who put him in the ground." Eli froze. "You buried Avery." Dillard nodded slowly. "He begged me to stop, said he'd gone too far, that he had proof that would ruin them all. I thought I was protecting this town, but I was just buying silence." He looked down at the lighter, thumb shaking. "I can't live with it anymore." Before Eli could move, Dillard flicked the lighter and threw it. Fire bloomed instantly, racing up the sides of the shed. The barrels inside hissed as their contents ignited. One exploded, sending a shockwave through the clearing. Agents dove for cover. Eli ran forward. The heat hit him like a wall, searing his face. He spotted Dillard stumbling backward, uniform burning at the edges. He grabbed the sheriff by the arm, dragging him through the snow. "Get up!" he shouted. "Move!" But Dillard pushed him away. His voice came out low, barely audible over the fire's roar. "I buried him. I couldn't live with it anymore." He staggered back toward the flames, as if pulled by something larger than guilt. For a heartbeat, Eli thought about following him, but Rocco barked behind him, sharp and desperate. Another explosion ripped through the clearing, sending a wall of heat and debris. Eli hit the ground, covering his head. When the fire settled, the shed was gone. Just a crater of smoke and burning metal. Dillard was gone too. Rocco limped to Eli's side, ears back, muzzle streaked with ash. He pressed his head against Eli's shoulder, steadying him. Eli looked around. The FBI team was regrouping, shouting into radios. The fire had begun to spread across the clearing, but the evidence they'd already excavated, photos, samples, bones, was safe. The truth had survived, even if Dillard hadn't. Eli stood slowly, brushing snow and soot from his jacket. He looked at the inferno where the sheriff had stood. "Guess he finally did one good thing," he murmured. Rocco leaned against his leg, eyes fixed on the fire. He didn't bark. He didn't move. Together they stood in silence as the flames consumed the last traces of the cover-up. The smoke curled into the sky, a dark pillar rising above Marrow Creek, part confession, part absolution. When it was over, Eli knelt beside Rocco, resting his hand on the dog's scarred flank. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "But this was the beginning." Rocco gave a soft, tired whine, the kind that carried both pain and pride. And in that sound, Eli heard everything he needed to keep going. Justice wasn't clean. It never was. But sometimes it burned its way through the lies until only the truth was left standing. Spring came to Marrow Creek with a strange quiet, the kind that follows a long storm. The snow had melted off the mountains, revealing the scars beneath. Black soil, burned timber, and the crater where Dillard's final act had erased what he once protected. But this time, the silence wasn't about fear. It was about waiting. The FBI made their findings public 3 weeks later. News vans rolled into town, their satellite dishes cutting through the skyline like strange mechanical birds. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, fighting for space on the steps. The headlines read, "Norcon Energy executives indicted for cover-up, illegal waste dumping, manslaughter." Eli sat in his truck at the edge of town, watching it all unfold on a portable radio. Rocco lay on the passenger seat, chin on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. Every now and then, he'd glance up at Eli as if sensing the tension that hadn't left him since the fire. "Looks like they finally believe us," Eli said quietly. Rocco thumped his tail once, slow and deliberate. 2 days later, they stood before a federal courthouse in Denver, a gray stone building that looked like it had been carved to intimidate. Reporters snapped photos as Eli climbed the steps, Rocco pacing at his side. The dog wore his old service harness, not for show, but because it made him calm. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with noise, voices, shuffling papers, the metallic clack of camera shutters. At the front, behind the long oak table, sat the men who had turned an entire valley toxic, Norcon's top executives. Their suits were immaculate, their faces pale. One of them, the CEO, Richard Vance, sat stiff, eyes cold and empty. Eli hadn't seen him in person before. The man looked ordinary. Grey hair, polished watch, the kind of confidence that came from years of money and distance. Yet something about him radiated arrogance, even now. When the judge entered, the room settled into a hush. The prosecution laid out the evidence, the chemical barrels, the autopsy on Avery's remains, the recordings, Dillard's final confession recovered from Eli's body cam. Each piece fit together with a terrible precision. But Vance still denied everything. When it was Eli's turn, he walked to the stand, his heart pounding against his ribs. Rocco followed close, permitted as a support K9. His claws clicked softly on the tile as they approached. The prosecutor asked questions with practiced calm, how Eli had found Avery's grave, what the recordings revealed, how the sheriff's guilt had come to light. Eli answered everyone, voice steady but low. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. The truth didn't need it. Then came the defense. Vance's lawyer rose, tall and sharp-faced, his voice cutting through the still air. "Mr. Cole, you claim to have discovered these barrels and remains on your own, guided by a dog? You expect this court to believe that?" Eli's jaw tightened. "I don't expect anything. I'm just telling you what happened." The lawyer smirked. "And we're supposed to take the word of a man who's been living off the grid in the mountains? With what, his psychic animal?" A few people in the gallery chuckled under their breath. Eli looked at the judge, then back at the lawyer. "That animal found a man everyone else forgot, including your client." The lawyer tried to press, but the judge cut him off. "Stick to the facts, counselor." When the defense rested, Vance himself stood to speak. He adjusted his tie and faced the jury, his voice smooth and calm. "I understand the emotion in this room," he said, "but Norcon has provided energy to this state for decades. We've employed thousands, built schools, funded hospitals. This story Mr. Cole tells, it's tragedy wrapped in conspiracy. A dead reporter, a disgraced sheriff, a burned cabin. Convenient pieces arranged by a man looking for attention. He paused, glancing toward Eli and Rocco. You can't convict a company on the barking of a dog. The words hung in the air. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. The defense smiled. Then, from the back of the courtroom, came a low, rumbling growl. Every head turned. Rocco stood beside Eli, muscles taut, eyes locked on Vance. His fur bristled along his back. The sound that came from him wasn't loud. It was deep, primal, the kind of growl that carried something ancient in it. Vance faltered mid-sentence. His hand, holding a sheet of paper, trembled slightly. The growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, a sound that didn't just come from a throat, it came from the earth itself. And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. No one moved, no one breathed. Eli didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Rocco stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Vance's until the man finally looked away. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge banged the gavel once but didn't speak. For a moment it felt as though the courtroom itself had acknowledged something beyond law or evidence, something true. Later, a reporter would write, "It wasn't the prosecutor or the witness who silenced the room that day. It was the dog." And for the first time, justice didn't need words. The jury returned their verdict in less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and clean, the sky breaking open to blue. Reporters swarmed again, microphones flashing, voices shouting questions. Eli didn't answer any. He just knelt beside Rocco, who sat patiently on the steps, eyes half closed, calm again. Eli rubbed the fur behind his ears. "You did good, partner." Rocco leaned against him, letting out a quiet sigh. The cameras caught that image, the man and his dog against the backdrop of the courthouse steps. It ran on every network that night. But what people remembered most wasn't the footage or the headlines. It was that moment in the courtroom when the dog growled and the world went still. Some said it was instinct. Others said it was loyalty. But those who were there swore it was something else entirely. They said it was the sound of justice finally finding its voice. The mountain had changed again. The ashes were long gone, the snow melted into soft green earth, and new pines had begun to rise where the fire once ate through the hillside. The air smelled clean now. No gasoline, no smoke, just pine and soil and wind. A year had passed since the trial. Eli Grant had rebuilt the old cabin, not as a home for himself, but as something larger, something that could give meaning to everything that had happened. He named it Rocco's Haven. From the outside, it looked like any other mountain lodge. A wide porch, fresh wood siding, smoke curling from a modest chimney. But the sign at the gate told a different story. A rehabilitation retreat for veterans and rescue dogs. Every week a few men and women arrived from all over the state. Some came with canes, some with missing limbs, some with eyes that didn't look anywhere for too long. The dogs came too, rescued shepherds, retrievers, mutts from the shelter. Together they learned to breathe again, to trust, to heal. Eli wasn't a counselor. He didn't try to be. He taught them what he knew, how to build, how to mend, how to listen when words weren't enough. And always, beside him, was Rocco. The shepherd had changed since that winter. His coat had dulled around the scar that ran along his left flank, and he limped slightly when the weather turned cold. But his eyes, sharp, intelligent, unwavering, were the same. He didn't need to run or fight anymore. He just watched. Most mornings, Eli would find him lying on the porch, facing the tree line, ears perked toward the wind like a sentry guarding the silence. Visitors noticed. They often asked why Rocco still seemed alert, even now. Eli would only smile and say, "Old habits die hard." One afternoon, a school van pulled up the gravel road. The local paper had sent a high school student named Sam to write a piece on Rocco's haven. He was small, nervous, with a notebook too big for his hands. Eli met him at the gate. "You must be Sam." "Yes, sir," the boy said, glancing past him at the porch. "Is that him?" Eli followed his gaze. Rocco was lying there, eyes half open, tail sweeping lazily. "That's him," Eli said. "The reason this place exists." Sam hesitated. "Can I, pet him?" "Ask him first," Eli said. Sam approached slowly, crouching a few feet away. Rocco lifted his head, sniffed the air, then inched closer. When the boy's hand finally touched his fur, Rocco gave a small huff, as if granting permission. Sam smiled. "He's calmer than I expected." Eli chuckled. "He's seen enough chaos for 10 lifetimes. They sat on the porch as the boy asked questions. How had Eli found the cabin? What really happened with Norcon? Why build a retreat instead of leaving it all behind? Eli answered, carefully, keeping the darker details to himself. But when Sam asked about the dog, why Rocco had stayed through everything, Eli paused for a long time. He looked out toward the forest, the sunlight cutting through the trees. He didn't stay because I asked him to. He stayed because he knew I wasn't done yet. Some dogs, they just know when something's wrong, and they don't stop until it's made right. Sam scribbled quickly in his notebook, then looked up again. Did he ever stop guarding? Eli smiled faintly, eyes softening. Only when he knew the truth was safe. The boy wrote that line down, underlining it twice. By evening, the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the cabin gold. The veterans gathered by the fire pit, the dogs sprawled across the grass. Laughter rose, a rare sound, fragile but real. Rocco stayed near the porch, watching it all. He didn't move, didn't bark. He just watched, the way soldiers do when they finally find peace, but never stop protecting it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eli stepped outside. The forest was quiet except for the river and the whisper of wind through the pines. He sat on the steps beside Rocco, who rested his chin on Eli's boot. You did good, buddy. Eli murmured. You gave this place a purpose? Rocco blinked slowly, tail brushing against the wood. Eli leaned back and looked at the stars. I don't know if justice ever really finishes, but maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe it's enough to leave something better behind. For a while, they just sat in the silence. Then, somewhere deep in the forest, a coyote howled, a long, low note that echoed through the valley. Rocco's ears perked, his eyes narrowing toward the sound. He didn't growl, he didn't chase, he just listened, as if recognizing an old song. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke and memory. Eli smiled faintly. Still guarding, huh? Rocco's tail gave a slow, steady thump. At the edge of the porch, a wooden plaque caught the moonlight. Carved into it were the words, "He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth." And below it, a smaller inscription, Rocco's Haven, where loyalty finds its way home. As the camera pans out, the cabin glows warm against the dark forest. The sound of the river hums beneath the night sky. Then the screen fades to black, and a single line appears. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you believe in loyalty, in courage, in the quiet power of a dog's heart, support our channel and share Rocco's story, because somewhere out there, another loyal friend is still guarding the truth.